Welcome back, everyone. What we're going to do now is we are finally going to put our suppliers and our consumers into the same picture and look at the market for milk. So before we go any further, there are a few things I want to just alert you to. So first and foremost, we're going to develop some pictorial representations, but always remember, a picture is simply a representation of my story or the theory. So when you do this picture, this is going to be one of the most iconic and famous graphs you will ever come across from economics, supply and demand. But you have to remember that there's a tendency very often for people to focus on the end result, and that's very bad, because if you do that, you miss the intermediate steps. And if you miss the intermediate steps, then you don't actually know how markets work, and so you won't know how to interpret what's going on if something shifts, right? So we're going to have to follow this whole story start to finish. Right? So in this story, what I want you to realize is that we have two agents, two people. Consumers, producers, two groups of people. And in this story, each one is doing their own thing. Each one is focused on prices, and they are responding to prices. Let us now go back to the milk market. This is just a replication of the data I had generated when I looked at my demand. So this is the price went from 1, 2, 3, 4, and as we saw, at a price of 4, the quantity demanded was 1. At a price of 3, it became 2. When the price fell to 2, it became 5. When the price was 1, it went to 8. Conversely, on the supply side, this is the same data I used for the quantity supplied. When the price was 4, 13 units were supplied. When the price was 2, 5 units were supplied, and so on. Right? So I am now going to take my consumers, and I'm going to take my producers, and I'm going to put them in the same picture. So let's just do that. It's easier to see this if I do it visually, but you don't need the graph. You can just do it with the numbers as well. So here we go. I'm going to generate my demand curve at a price of 1. So let's say this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16. So at a price of 1, the quantity demanded was 8. At a price of 2, the quantity demanded was 5. At a price of 3, the quantity demanded was 2. At a price of 4, the quantity demanded was 1. So here is my demand curve. I'm going to see if I can figure out my supply curve. At a price of 1, the quantity supplied was 1. At a price of 2, the quantity supplied was 5. At a price of 3, the quantity supplied was 8. At a price of 4, the quantity supplied was 13. And there is my supply curve. Now, you are going to be tempted to look at this and say, oh, look, there's a place where these curves cross. That is not a story. That's not an explanation. That's not an analysis. That's just a place where curves cross. Right? It turns out it's going to be an important point, but we have to tell the story of what's happening in this market to understand what's going on. All right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say what happens in the market. Let's say if the price was $1. At a price of $1, over here, I'm going to draw a dashed line to show that. Consumers would like to buy 8 gallons of milk. Right? But at the price of $1, suppliers only wish to sell 1 gallon of milk. Right? So here we are. Those decisions don't match. The consumer would like to buy 8. The supplier wishes to sell 1. So what you've got is a situation of what we call excess demand. That is, there is more demand than there is supply, right? So that's what you're seeing here. There's an excess demand of 7, right? Now, what you want to realize is that when there is an excess demand, it means that somebody was unable to meet their decisions, right? So in this case, here you are, you go to the market, people are trying to buy milk, and there's no milk in the store, right? The shelves are emptying. There's only 1 gallon of milk, there's none there, all right? And now something has to happen in this market. And that means if something has to happen, it means that somebody needs to be making some changes in decision making in order for a result to happen. Because, you know, the first and most important thing to think about is that changes happen when somebody can't meet their decisions, right? So when change happens, we say that you are out of equilibrium, right? So here is the second thing you want to figure out. Equilibrium, this is a word that economists use a lot, and it's taken from the natural sciences, actually physics, but other places as well. And essentially, equilibrium is a situation where something has come to rest. There is no additional tendency for change. So a situation of equilibrium, for example, would be when no more changes can happen, all right? But if there is going to be changes, the situation is not one of equilibrium. So that's all, right? This is important because when we go on, especially to places like macroeconomics, we're going to come across situations of equilibrium where markets don't clear, right? And then as they raise prices, the price starts creeping up. And as they do that, along the supply curve, so let's say the price goes from $1 to $2, then at what starts to happen is this shortage starts shrinking, because as the prices rise, suppliers start increasing their supply, quantity supplied, and as the prices rise, consumers start cutting back their quantity demanded, all right? So when the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, step 2, I have a shortage or excess demand. Step 3, the price starts to go up. Quantity demanded starts to decrease, quantity supplied starts to increase, and this keeps happening until there is no more shortage, all right? So when there is no more shortage, at that point, the situation finally stops seeing all these changes in the price and in quantity demand and quantity supplied, and the market comes to rest. This we call equilibrium. This happens when quantity demanded exactly equals quantity supplied. Conversely, if we had a situation where the price was at $4, what you would see is that quantity supplied is way out here at 13, quantity demanded is just at 1. In this case, you've got a glut in the market. You've got an excess supply. There's way too much milk in the market, nobody's buying it. And producers find that they cannot sell their stuff. When that happens, they try and dispose of their stuff by starting to cut back on prices, by offering it more cheaply. So when you've got a situation of excess supply, which is over here in this case, an excess supply or a glut in the market. So over here, that is the equilibrium, right? The equilibrium price of $2 and an equilibrium quantity of 5 gallons, right? So in such a situation, what we're saying is that in an individual market where you have price competition and where you have relative responsiveness in this manner, usually equilibrium is going to take place where quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied. Just a reminder, just because it's the place where the curves cross, that's not why it's equilibrium. It's equilibrium because this is the situation where the market will come to rest. There's going to be many situations, and as we go through this quarter, and then for those of you who stay with me and take macroeconomics when you come to the next quarter, we will come to situations where the markets come to rest in places where the curves don't cross. All right? So do make sure that you pay attention not to the sort of technical place where the curves cross and so on. This is a story. It's a visually told story, but it's a story. And so you need to actually understand the story of equilibrium and the story of what it is producers are doing when they see a surplus, or what it is producers are doing when they see a shortage, what it is consumers are doing when there is a surplus or shortage, in order to understand why you end up there. Because if people don't do that, or if prices don't adjust in that way, or if somebody makes a decision that's just very different, right? Then you won't end up reaching equilibrium in this way or in this location. So let's stop here now and take a minute to think of what we've learned. We've learned that the price mechanism in competitive markets, which is an assumption of how markets work, where there is relatively free entry and exit into the market, when you have situation where consumers are just focusing on the prices and not on anything else, and producers are just focusing on the prices and not on anything else, where the two groups are interacting purely through the market. In these situations, through price competition for an individual market, what we say is that equilibrium will take place when quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied, ceteris paribus.